Bojo Nikon, Bobby Trey Trousdale, and Nadesh Nakat. My name is Bobby Trey Trousdale, and I welcome you, friends. I am from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and we are so excited to have you joining us today from wherever you are. Please do feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining today's conversation from. On behalf of Native Americans in Philanthropy, I'd like to welcome you to our September member education session. Today's conversation is so important, and we're honored to have you here with us. It's also very timely. If you didn't know yet, today is National Voter Registration Day. Happy day to those who celebrate. I have been a proud registered voter since just before my 18th birthday. If you, your family, or others in your life aren't registered, I want to start our time together by encouraging you to do so. I fully expect this call to action to become a tiny bit repetitive throughout our time together. And that is okay, mainly because we know that nearly 2 out of every 5 eligible Native Americans are not registered to vote yet. At the same time, we've also seen the sheer power of Indigenous voting as a block and the elevation of our perspective all the way to the presidential cabinet. That impact only increases the more relatives we get registered. This is something that our panelists are directly or indirectly working to address and further. As always, we'll provide some resources and ways to connect at the end of this broadcast. If you're on a desktop that can support multiple tabs though, and you haven't, I'd like to encourage you to visit vote.gov right now to at least begin learning a little bit more about the registration process, or to save this as a follow-up resource for once we finish today. Personally, voting and civic engagement have been goals and checkpoints throughout my life that have marked important transitions. I was proud to cast my first real election vote in a Citizen Potawatomi Nation election just after I turned 18. For my very first professional role on a college campus, I was asked to serve as the inaugural Director of Student Civic Engagement and chair the Student Civic Engagement Committee. I then went on to be elected Oklahoma City University's first Indigenous student body president in an election that had one of the largest turnouts yet, largely because participation was prioritized over partisanship by both campaigns. These experiences just add to the importance and the excitement that I'm bringing with me into the space today as we sit down with our panelists. The ability to vote is a fundamental part of democracy. It gives each of us the power to shape our communities and the policies that impact our daily lives. For Indigenous peoples, this right is even more profound. Despite decades of oppressive and exclusionary policies aimed at eroding our sovereignty, we have continued to thrive. Voting is not just a right, it is a powerful act of honoring our ancestors and securing our future. It's how we ensure that our voices, past, present, and future, are heard and respected. Voting is sovereignty in action, and our fight for civic rights extends well beyond the ballot box. Our amazing panelists today do just that. Each of them work and are leaders at the intersection of civic and Indigenous engagement. They bring a plethora of experiences, and audiences with them are sure to make today a robust discussion. We're beyond pleased to be joined by each of them and are excited to get started. So let's dive right in. As we get started, I wanted to let those joining us know that there has been a slight alteration to today's program. Jacqueline De Leon from NARF is currently in the air traveling to work in rural Alaska. We're sending her wishes for safe travels, but she won't be able to join us today. But we are very pleased to be welcoming her esteemed colleague, Matthew Campbell, the Deputy Director of NARF. So Matthew, as well as our other panelists, will be making their way to the screen now. And panelists, as you're called, please introduce yourself and your affiliations however you feel comfortable. We want to center today's conversation in community and action. Please take as much time as you need, and I'll be here to simply pass along to the next person whenever you wrap up. So to get us started, Dr. Karry.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cheryl Karry. I'm an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and Executive Director of the Sacred Pipe Resource Center, and have always been a social justice advocate and an advocate for our communities. And so getting involved in voting efforts and civic engagement efforts is just a natural extension of my growth as an individual, and really happy to be here to talk about these important issues. Thank you.
We're excited to have you, very excited to have you. Ginny.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ginny Underwood. I'm a member or citizen of the Comanche Nation here based out of Oklahoma City with Rock the Native Vote. We're very excited to celebrate National Voter Registration Day today. If you're in the Oklahoma City area, we do have an event this evening. We're having a blues concert that we'd love for people to come out to. But it's a very exciting time to be a part of this process, and that we want to help get as many people registered as we can, and then not only registered, but to the actual polls to cast their vote this fall. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We're excited to have you, and I must give you and your team at Rock the Native Vote a thank you for sponsoring today's outfit. I was going to say, who am I wearing? I am wearing your hard work, so thank you for that. And finally, last but certainly not least, Matthew.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, Trey, and so glad to be with you all on today. My name is Matthew Campbell. I'm the Deputy Director at the Native American Rights Fund. I'm enrolled in the Native Village of Gambell in Alaska, and I'm so pleased to be able to work at NARF, protecting the right to vote. It's been such an honor working with our people. I know I've worked with Dr. Karry before, and look forward to working with Ginny into the future, and really excited to be here. And again, thank you for having me.
Of course, as you can tell, today's panel is going to be, I think, just a stellar all-star cast. So I cannot wait for us to just dive right into this. So let's get started. Dr. Karry, I'm coming your way with this first question. What has shaped your personal views on voting and civil rights?
I think a lot of what has shaped my views is the fact that voting is really not a traditional Native process. And so growing up, it wasn't a first thought. It wasn't a part of our cultural practices. And I think even on a local level, within our tribe, elections weren't really talked about, weren't really, processes that we really got involved in. And so it really got me curious about this process and how, as Native people, we've been disenfranchised from voting for so long. And I think, just trying to reconcile this process that was never designed for us from the get-go, it has been something that's intrigued me for a long time, and so led me to do the work in the way that I do the work today.
Absolutely. Ginny, I'll throw it your way. What has shaped your personal views on voting and civil rights?
Right. Good question. I had to give this some thought, and I thought back to I used to be the director for the Indian Law Resource Center. And at the time, we were working with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center to, we were trying to get VAWA reauthorized. And working with the advocates and the lawmakers, they prepared briefings, and we would go in and we would talk to lawmakers, and we'd have to educate them not only about the statistics that were just coming out about the violence against Indigenous women, but the problems of jurisdiction, state, federal, tribal jurisdiction issues. And then the conversations had to continue into our jurisdictional processes, our courtrooms, how we were able to manage cases. And so there was so much education that had to go into helping our elected officials understand issues that were facing Indian country, that I started to think, well, if if we elected our Indigenous people, we could be starting at a point of solution versus the amount of effort and that it takes for us to get somebody up to speed with issues that we face every day. And so that started to get my wheels spinning in terms of, we have to begin this process. We have to educate at all levels, not only for the lawmakers that are elected, but for our tribal people to understand how important it is for them to engage with them so that they're getting our perspectives. We're elevating our own leadership into elected positions, so that we're really starting to impact this, as Carrie put it, the systemic issue that has kept us from participating. You know what I mean? It hasn't been a part of our culture, but it's something that we have to engage in to have an impact, but we have such a long way to go. And so voter registration is just part of this process, but those are the kinds of thoughts in my work in communications and helping to work on these bigger political issues that it just started to help me understand that there's so much to be done at so many levels, and I just need to be part of that. So those are the kinds of things that got me interested in figuring out what are the steps to get there and to help our Indigenous folks be represented.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Matthew, over to you. I know the journey to becoming a lawyer is not a short one. So what has shaped your personal views on voting and civil rights along that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it actually goes further back than that. My dad was born in the Village in Alaska, but was adopted out in the 1950s before the Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted into law. And so I knew from an early age about that and that history and understanding the importance of federal law has on us as Native people. And then, of course, going to college, undergrad, and through law school, learning about the history of not just people in Alaska, but all of our Native people, right? Learning about termination and removal and assimilation and all these different policies, federal policies that really impact us on a day-to-day basis, to this day, really has shaped my views on voting and civil rights. And then I think finally I would be remiss if I didn't mention my first foray into voting rights, which was working actually in North Dakota and representing several individual tribal members from Turtle Mountain. And one in particular, Elvis Norquay, who was a veteran and was one of the individuals turned away from voting in North Dakota because all he had was a tribal ID that only had a P.O. box on it. And really working with him and how hard he worked to make sure that he showed up every day for us in the lawsuit and really understood the importance of voting to Native people has really shaped my views on why it's so important and just the fight that many of our elders have had to go through to be in the position to even vote in the first place. So those are some of the things that have certainly shaped my views.
Absolutely. I appreciate, I think throughout all of your responses, just that tie to community and that tie to whether it be working for our elders, working for our people, working for our communities at large, and the policies that are affecting it. I think that just adds an extra layer of dimension, and really your heart work is showing in all that you do and having it tied to those different things. So we'll move on to the next question, which would be can you share some historical challenges Indigenous communities have faced regarding voting and civil rights? And we really want to use this, I think, as just a level setting to get, we know that our audience is coming to this conversation with different levels of knowledge. So Ginny, if you can start off with just, I think, educating us and getting us all on the same page.
I can give you my thoughts on that for sure. Historically, in Oklahoma, I'll speak specifically to where we are, Bobby Trey, that, historic trauma is very real. The things that we've gone through with relationships with the federal government, there's a lot of people, Indigenous community members, who are reluctant to vote because of things that have happened historically between federal government and our tribal communities. And they might have been years and years ago, but it still impacts the thought process in today, so that it makes it difficult for people to want to engage in voting, whether it was, treaty violations or boarding school relationships or any number of things that we've survived through. It still has an effect on the way that people view their actions today. Why, a lot of the conversations that we have to talk about those things. It's not just talking about the patriotic reasons to vote, but it's talking about how we start to heal our communities and how we start to leverage our power. And it's still impacted by the things that we've lived through as tribal people in Oklahoma today. So I think that creates all sorts of barriers and challenges for us. Anytime that for a long time, the only time that you heard about Indigenous issues in our state was when it came to taxing or gaming or, difficult situations. And those are the only things that people would hear about with our tribal communities. And so there's a lot of negativity there. And I think people not being able to see the value of our tribal communities, and then our tribal communities not seeing themselves reflected in the electoral process has created this conflict. And it made people just not willing to participate. And Oklahoma already has really low voter turnout rates historically, and then getting people to engage and see the value of why they should vote has been part of our challenges at Rock the Native Vote that we're trying to address, to make sure that we talk about the realities of our historical trauma. We talk about the impacts and how it still impacts us today, and then try to help people see a vision where they can engage and change the future relationships and improve our situations across the state. So those are just some of the things that we're dealing with here.
Absolutely. Matthew, I'm going to go over to your neck of the woods, and whether you want to take this from a community or a national perspective, can you share some of the historic challenges Indigenous communities have faced regarding voting and civil rights?
Yeah, thank you so much. There really are just so many. It's hard to limit it to just a few, right? But when we think about voting in particular, states, there have been so many discriminatory practices historically that have been in place to prevent Native people from participating in democracy. Of course, the Native people weren't citizens of the United States until 1924. So coming out of the Civil War, when the United States, adopted the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, it didn't apply to Native people, right? Equal laws didn't apply to non-citizens of the United States. And so just building off of that, states adopted a whole slew of discriminatory practices that prevented Native people from participating, whether that was requiring a Native person to become civilized in order to vote. And really what that meant was you had to give up your relationship to your community, your political relationship. You had to move away and essentially become a farmer, and then swear that you were civilized and wouldn't go back to your community, right? So these civilization tests that were adopted. There were requirements that said Native people were not residents of the state where they lived because they lived on reservations, and so therefore they weren't qualified to vote because they didn't meet the residency requirements of the states. And there's so many others that come to mind, that I can think of. But through the years, we have fought to overcome these challenges. Many of our veterans coming back from World War II were on the front lines of making challenges to whether it's these residency requirements, civilization requirements, or guardianship requirements. They essentially poll taxes or literacy tests. Our people fought to overcome them and made sure that we have that right to vote today.
Absolutely. Dr. Karry, to just round out our group, can you share some historic challenges from your community or from your sphere of knowledge of challenges Indigenous communities have faced regarding civil rights and voting?
Right. I think So we could talk about some of the technical challenges, and I think it's, like we're all pretty much well aware that there's a lot of technical challenges to voting in Indian country. But I think what we try to work on is a little bit more the paradigm barriers, because I think it is a paradigm shift for us to really think about being voters. Our traditional communities pushed leaders forward. We didn't elect leaders. And so the whole notion of somebody putting themselves out there as a candidate to get elected and then having to do the whole, oh, I'm great, I'm the best candidate. It's a really uncomfortable process for us, for a culture that values humility and values, servant leadership. And so it's like a lot of things that we deal with. The education system, there isn't a system, I think, in the U.S. that is made for us as Indigenous people. Not the education system, not the voting system, not the child welfare system, not courts. Everything we deal with is basically a foreign system. And so the biggest challenge, I think, is really getting around that paradigm barrier. And how do we claim voting as an Indigenous process and as an Indigenous duty that we need to do to hold leaders accountable? I think a lot of times when we talk about voting, we leave out that big accountability piece, because historically, parties come to our reservation lands or come to our tribal communities, and they're like, can we get your vote? Can we have your vote? And they do the handshaking and they do the back patting and all of that. And then they walk away and they never come back to our communities and they never follow up on promises. And so those are the types of challenges, because it's a paradigm shift. How do we get involved in this process when we know that we're not following through with that accountability piece? So I think in addition to the technical difficulties, we really have a steep hill to climb, because we have to fight against the fact that we're dealing in a foreign system too.
Absolutely. I think that dealing in that foreign system, I kind of want to tease out in this next question. And Matthew, I'm coming to you for the first part of this is, how have you seen the long-term effects of that oppression or of that paradigm shift, the establishment of that paradigm? How have you seen the long-term effects show up in your work?
Yeah, I think Dr. Karry really touched on this, right? We're thinking about and trying to shift the way we think about voting, and it's difficult, right? It's complicated when you think about the history of our people, the theft of our land, putting us on reservations with no opportunity or very little opportunities to succeed economically, being isolated, and just understanding, the history that has happened to our people, to then come and say, it really is important for you to make your voice heard, to participate in this process that has left you in poverty in many ways, on isolated reservations where it feels like a system that's not for you, right? And I think we see this in our work here at NARF every day, whether it's working to protect the right to vote, in North Dakota or South Dakota, or whether it's working to protect our sacred places that have been taken through history and now are being, proposed to be demolished through mines or pipelines. All of these different things, we see through the history of oppression and assimilation, whether you think about boarding schools or all of the different policies that have impacted us, have an effect still to this day. And it affects the right to vote. And so making that shift and understanding and conveying to our community the importance of voting when they're dealing with so many of these big issues, it can be difficult at times. And I think there are many administrations that have been good and some that have been not so good. And I don't think there has been a perfect one for us, right? As was mentioned, there's not a perfect system for Native people. But we have seen that making our voice heard can have an impact, right? The Native vote can have an impact in terms of getting folks elected that understand the importance of tribal sovereignty, that understand the importance of our women and children to us and our communities and protecting them. So those barriers are certainly there, and that history is still affecting us to this day, and it's something we certainly have to overcome.
Absolutely. Dr. Karry, you have already, I think, spoken to that in that paradigm shift, but how have you seen the long-term effects of the oppression and exclusion from those historical challenges show up in your work?
Well, I think certainly the apathy in our communities towards voting. And so a lot of our work is really like trying to re-engage, trying to indigenize the process of voting as much as possible, of holding leaders accountable, of recognizing how the system works and how it impacts our community specifically. So I think for a long time, the idea is really just like, oh, we're voting for a president and that's it, this one leader. But our work really goes back to local offices and who sits in those local seats and how does that impact them on an everyday basis. So the challenge is getting people to understand the system. So it's hard, again, because it's not really a system that's familiar to us. And so understanding the system and understanding how it impacts us as Indigenous people is important, because that's making that paradigm shift. And it's also addressing those historical oppression pieces. This is how you've been disenfranchised from voting, and this is why you need to, why do they want to keep you out of the voting process so bad? That's a key question. Because we can be very powerful, and we have I think a really good ethical, moral, culturally based barometer as Indigenous people that could make the world better for everybody. And there's some people, political people, that are very afraid of that. So just making our communities aware that they wouldn't try to oppress your vote so hard if they didn't have something to be afraid of from you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ginny, I'll throw it your way. How have you seen the long-term effects show up in your work?
Yeah, kind of echoing what we've already heard. I think a lot of times we're working in Oklahoma City and the Tulsa areas where you have urban Native Americans who might live off reservation or outside of tribal services, and their priority is just to get through the week, get through the day, pay rent, make the bills, and voting is way, way, way down on the list of priorities to the things that occupy their minds. And so trying to reach them where they're at, helping them understand that there are political decisions and policy that are impacting the way that they live their life every day. And that being, as Dr. Karry said, being able to vote at your school districts, there might be school policies that are impacting you. There might be, at every level of government, there's somebody that's elected in those positions. And in Oklahoma, a lot of times they go uncontested. Like, we have the same people in office for years and years and years because nobody's running against them. Or, that we're not engaging at those levels to be able to elect representatives that may have Indigenous values. So I think engaging with people and helping them understand that electing and voting give you power, and it can help improve your life at that very fundamental level, I think is part of the messaging we try to talk about with Rock the Native Vote. But, we understand that it's going to take 6 or 7 times for us reaching out to the same person to get on their radar, to get them up to speed with what we're talking about, and getting them actually to our events or actually to the polls to vote, knowing that the things that they are occupying their time with, just to make it through the week. And so there's lots of levels of engagement that we see. And then it also leads to, because of the historic trauma and the things that we've already discussed, it's just not a priority. It's not seen as something that is going to benefit them, when actually it could greatly benefit not only themselves, but all of our tribal communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've never heard of keeping an elected politician on their toes as a bad thing. So we got to do it. Right. I think especially in Oklahoma, Make the calls, show up, be there, and vote.
Like,
Well, Dr. Karry, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier in one of your responses, and I think that would be the current barriers that Indigenous people face. So we know that I think everyone on this call is well aware of that, but just in case our audience isn't, or maybe this isn't their area of expertise, can you walk us through what those current barriers that Indigenous people face when it comes to voting or even registering to vote, maybe?
Right. I think just in, like the disenfranchisement, on top of that, some of the technical things. So we're kind of an odd duck here in North Dakota, because in North Dakota, we don't have voter registration. You basically just show up with an ID. So as NARF knows, definitely helping here in North Dakota, there's a lot of issues with the IDs. So just having housing, because it's required that you have a physical address on your ID. And in many tribal communities, we have post office boxes. But I think in other areas, there's systemic oppression and exclusion efforts that are being done in terms of voting. And that includes things like, having access to polling places. Polling places tend not to be places where Native people are. And so there's some challenges with getting to the polls. I think there's challenges with the registration process in other states where polls are purged, where people aren't aware that there is a registration process. I think some of the barriers include just like Ginny had talked about, the just not being aware of the issues. And so when you come to vote, you get to the actual ballot that you have in your hand, and then not really knowing who the candidates are or what the issues are, because you don't have the luxury to be scrolling through campaign brochures and websites and things like that. And so it's a challenge because our Indigenous people struggle every day with real life issues. And so just having to locate all of that information and go do all of that groundwork to find out about candidates and measures and things like that is a challenge. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing now is the disinformation that's being put out there. I think a lot of Indigenous people live in the real world, and so we're maybe not so social media or tech savvy. And so, hearing, some stories and disinformation that's put out there, it's a challenge for our tribal communities. So I know that a lot of the Native-led nonprofits that are doing this work, we really have to be on our toes about getting correct information and correcting disinformation. So it's just there's so many issues. It's insane.
I was going to say, all I hear is more work on top of more work on top of more work. Ginny, I'll send it over to you. What are the current barriers that Indigenous people face when it comes to voting or registering to vote?
I think Oklahoma particularly has some difficult issues in terms of we didn't have any kind of online registration up until 2023, which was just last year. And so you had to have a paper registration and be in person. For absentee ballots, they require notarization, which is a barrier for our community members being able to get it completed and notarized. And I think one of our biggest challenges, they purge our rolls. So we are required to have voter registration here in Oklahoma. And every third year or every odd year, they purge what they call inactive voters. And so 100,000 people have been purged off of Oklahoma voter rolls since 2021. So if you haven't voted in the last couple of elections, you may no longer be registered and not know it. So those are just some of the things that, we get them registered, but then they may not stay on the rolls because they haven't voted. So those are, just some minor things that we're up against this year, just to making sure people know that they have to check the registration, they have to check their polling place, they have to make sure their data is correct. But one advantage, you can now in Oklahoma use your tribal ID to vote, which is a good thing. But again, just dispelling if you're able, or trying to decipher if you're able to vote at all is a challenge here for us.
Absolutely. That is good to know about the tribal ID. I cannot wait to use that.
Yes.
Next or November. I will be throwing that kink in my precinct staffers' plans for that day, for sure. Now, Matthew, I want to extend this to you. What are the current barriers that Indigenous people face when it comes to voting or even registering to vote that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it is National Voter Registration Day. So I went online this morning to check my registration status. And lucky me, I'm still active here in Colorado. So that's great. But, I had the luxury of having a computer, being able to do that from my office, check my status and easily be able to confirm that I am registered. Right. And the way we've looked at it here at NARF is kind of broken it down into two different buckets, right? We look at kind of the structural barriers and then the legal ones. And I think there are so many structural barriers that an average person that's not Native would be shocked to learn that Native people face, right? So in terms of structural barriers, thinking about the high levels of poverty that many of our communities face, right? Lack of access to transportation. And then you combine that with the distance from the reservation to a polling place or to a motor vehicle site to be able to get an ID, right? So from Standing Rock to Bismarck, 60 miles one way, if you want to go get a state ID to be able to vote using a state ID, right? So you combine that distance with the high levels of poverty and lack of access to transportation or to a computer or technology, and it makes it an easy choice for so many of our people, right? They're going to choose, choosing food on their plate or providing for their family over driving, 2 hours round trip to be able to get registered or to vote or to get an ID. And we see those in many places all across Indian country, right? Those structural barriers, distances where polling places are located off reservation, hundreds of miles away, or, the roads are in terrible condition that get muddied out when it rains or if it's snowy. So just these structural things that most people don't think about. The other big structural thing is also something that's been alluded to is just the lack of addressing that people just don't really think about, right? And so a lot of people today, when they register to vote, they do it by mail. They have, they register and they get the application sent to their mailbox. And usually you have to have a residential address and receive mail at your home to be able to get that information. Well, on many reservations, right, we don't have addresses. People will typically drive to the community center where the post office is located, and there's a whole bunch of P.O. boxes. And we all know about the res directions in order to get to your house, right? Go 3 miles down BIA Road 5 and take a right at, the big Oakwood, right? And our house is the third one on the left, right? There's no address. And so that is a real issue that our people face, is just not having mail delivery to our homes. And it really affects the ability to register and then the ability to vote as well, as more states are moving to a vote by mail system. So those are kind of the structural barriers I think about in one pot. And then there's the legal barriers that we have seen that get adopted that seize on these structural barriers, right? So adopting an ID requirement that makes it so you have to have a physical address to be able to vote, right? When they know on reservations there are no addresses. Adopting a ballot collection measure that makes it illegal for our community members to take your family's ballot and drop it off at the P.O. box. So we see these legal barriers put in place, whether it's residential addressing, ballot collection, or the lack of translating ballots or election materials into native languages, which is required under the Voting Rights Act. So all of these legal barriers that get adopted to seize on the structural barriers and make it nearly impossible for many of our people to vote. So that's how I think about it, is kind of looking at those structural barriers that, as we've talked about, are tied to that history of discrimination and the policies that our people face, the isolation, the poverty, and then you combine those with the legal barriers of putting polling places hundreds of miles away, or requiring an address, or not translating materials, and it really makes it very difficult for many of our people to participate in the process. And what it really says is, in not so many words, that this is a process that is not for you. It's not something that you should participate in because, look, you have to drive 100 miles if you want to do this. So we're not going to make it easy. And so the average person that's out there just has no idea about these barriers that Native people face.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate all of you, I think, in providing just those different mosaic pieces that really, I think, tell a representative story of the experience within Indian country, and just not all, but to just allude to some of the barriers that we face in, I think, what would be considered the bedrock or cornerstone of the American democratic system, or democracy in general. We have those additional challenges. So I think we've done a good job of level setting for our audience before we dive, I think, deeper into some of these questions. I do want to take just a brief moment and let our audience know that we are accepting questions for a live Q&A, and we'll be sprinkling those throughout the program and near the end of our time together. So please do feel free to throw those out, to include those in those comment sections wherever you're joining us from. We will try and get those integrated into today's session. Before we move on too far, though, I promise I'm not picking on you, but you did say something about social media. So I feel like now's a really good time to hit a question from IPS Graphics that was submitted, which would be, does social media have a big impact on voting? And I'll leave that on the table for whoever would like to pick it up first. But we'll make a stop at everybody. Don't worry.
I can go first.
Okay, perfect. I will call on somebody if there's too much silence. So get on it.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's really important, especially for us in Oklahoma. We're grassroots nonprofit organizations with limited budget and resources, and so of course, social media is going to be one of the most consistent ways that we're able to reach our audience. We actually shifted because we got online voter registration in 2023 here in Oklahoma. We have strengthened our online presence for Rock the Native Vote, and it's become one of the main ways that we communicate with our audiences and participants for our events. So for us, it has become really important. I know that we try to keep other traditional means of communications as well, but we're finding more and more that grandma out in Atoka has a cell phone and can scroll Facebook, right? You know what I mean? So like our community members are becoming up to speed with technology. So we have relied heavily on social media for the work that we do here in Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And done it beautifully, by the way, just to give you your kudos in this space as well. So Matthew, I'll come to you, and Dr. Karry, since it's your question, I'm going to give you a final word on it.
Well, I absolutely think social media has a huge impact and can impact voting. Like Ginny mentioned, a lot of our elders, our grandmas are on Facebook, and despite the fact that, when you drive onto the reservation, you suddenly lose service, it seems all of our grandmas have Facebook. So, you show up at the casino, you get some internet, and you do your surfing. And but I absolutely think social media, especially with our youth, when you think about Instagram or TikTok or X, all of these platforms really do have a big impact on availability of information, whether it's registration or disinformation, but the ability to make an impact in making sure that folks understand the importance of the right to vote.
Absolutely. And I just echo, I think that there's something beautiful to social media when it comes to excitement as well. I think scrolling X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, I have never been more excited for an election since I've had the opportunity to vote. And so that's something very new and weird, but I'm very glad to be in that space going into November. So Dr. Karry, I'll send it to you for the final word.
So I do think social media has a role in voting. I'm a little hesitant to say that it has a big impact on voting, just because there's so much information that comes at a person. Like anybody that gets on social media and starts scrolling, it's just issue after issue, thing after thing. I think as Indigenous people, we're relationship people. So social media is really about connecting with family and friends, and not so much about issues. So they see the initial, oh, there's an election coming up. Oh, here's what they're saying about certain candidates. Oh, this happened, this event happened. But in terms of like meaningful dialogue, I think I don't think social media has the impact that we want it to have in terms of like getting people to talk about issues and to elevate the importance of voting and paying attention to candidates and paying attention to the issues. And so I think social media can have an impact on, getting people into those venues, the actual one-on-one venues or the community-based venues. So, and I think Ginny will agree with me, like, because I know they do an awesome job. Like, let's use social media to get people here so we can actually talk about the issues. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of like where Indigenous people get their information and how they're educating themselves about voting isn't necessarily social media. It's from their groups and their relatives and their families and their communities. So I think it has an impact, but I don't think that it has the impact that we wished it would have. And then, like I said, with the disinformation that's coming out, I think it's real easy to lead people astray. And so it's a necessary evil. I think I'm probably an oddball for saying that, but I do. Yeah.
Oh, no, not an oddball at all. I appreciate when we would always come to those kind of like bigger questions that don't have an answer, I always just leave it at, sounds like a great opportunity for a capstone or a thesis. So budding scholars, there you go. That's your thing for the day, your assignment for the day. Well, I'd like to move now just into some directed questions related to each of your work or your organizations. So Ginny and Dr. Karry, I'm going to start with you just at that local level. And Matthew, we'll come to NARF in just a little bit. But I want to give each of you all an opportunity to really share with our audience, how have each of your organizations improved voter education and outreach in Indigenous communities or your community in particular? And so, Ginny, I'll throw it to you first on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Rock the Native Vote has been working in Oklahoma since around 2002 and have been primarily focused on voter registration and engagement. And we've done everything from, attend every wild onion dinner in the spring to setting up at powwows. We've expanded into public service announcements. We're fortunate here that Lane Factor, who plays Cheese on Reservation Dogs, lives right here in Oklahoma and is actually in the same city that I'm at, and we know his mom. And so we're able to call Lane up and say, can you do a PSA for us? As well as Lil Mike and Funny Bone have been a part of our activities in the past. We've hosted events, but with the name of Rock the Native Vote, music has always been an integral part of what we do with our events. We try to feature Indigenous artists. Like I said earlier tonight, we're hosting a blues concert, Red, White, and Blues event, where we're bringing in Indigenous blues singers. Downtown Oklahoma City, our Tulsa partner, our Tulsa chapter of Rock Native Vote is doing a bingo night with also Warren Quitone, who was in Reservation Dogs as well. So the Oklahoma connections with celebrities has definitely helped us in getting people interested in our events and wanting to participate. But really trying to create fun and events that lift up our community, gives a platform for different Indigenous artists to participate. But making it family friendly, making it a safe environment for people to come in and ask questions about voter engagement, about the voting process, and being readily available through our website as well as our social media. As I said before, we really kind of have taken another step, not just about voter registration, but we now have commitment cards. We want people to register for sure, but we also, because, probably 9 times out of 10 people say I'm already registered at this point. And so we ask them to fill out our voter commitment card. So we don't want, we want you to be engaged, but we also want you to commit to going to the polls on November 5th. And so that's an extension of what we've done in the past, is trying to move beyond the registration to get people to have a plan, to invite their relatives and their families and friends and go and vote together. Don't vote alone, and really embrace the opportunity to have an impact. And so that's kind of where our growth has been, from going out to every community event we could get to building a following, building support, creating these family events where people can come to us, and growing our numbers and participation through those events, and empowering our folks to feel like they have a voice and feel like that they have a strategy to get involved, and support from us to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Dr. Karry, over to you for this one. How has your organization, Sacred Pipe, how have you all improved voter education and outreach in Indigenous communities, or in your specific?
I think, like given what I said earlier, that the system is foreign to us. A lot of our work has really been laying the groundwork for helping Indigenous people in our urban tribal community understand this system, this foreign system that we're working in. That how does a local office impact you on an everyday basis? What are these offices in charge of? How, what decisions do they make that impact you? And just creating that awareness. So we do a lot of, we got to have fun events, where it brings people together, community together, so that people can learn together. We try to provide safe spaces. I think, as Ginny was saying, that's important, like that safety, and being able to come in and ask a question that you can't ask anywhere else. I think those are important. But we also do things like vote fairs, and we do a mock vote, so that we get people in the process of, so they're not deer in the headlights when they get the actual ballot, so we have the sample ballots, and, we give them opportunities to practice voting. And so they can stop and they can ask questions at any point in the process, which you can't do, or they're not comfortable doing when they're actually in that process. And so just giving them an opportunity to do that. And then a lot of the work that we do, we try to embed civic engagement and voting in all of the things that we do. So as a Native-led nonprofit, I think I could speak for every Native-led nonprofit out there. We really don't have the luxury of being one issue organizations. We're dealing with domestic violence. We're dealing with housing. We're dealing with health. We're dealing with MMIW. We're dealing with education in schools. And so our work is really about what kind of change, what kind of policy changes, or, structural changes do we need to see in these systems? And then what is the mechanism we use to make those changes? And a lot of that goes back to voting and civic engagement and being aware of who the, elected leaders are. And so I think just making those connections for our community is important. And we like to have people engaged in our activities that also can influence their families, because we know that there's always a matriarch there that, an auntie there that tells her nieces and nephews how to vote, or a grandma there that says, go, gets after their family members, go vote. So just trying to bring those key elements into every program that we do. And I know that I want to speak on behalf of Native-led nonprofits, because I see one of the questions that came in is about other orgs that to be involved in. And pretty much every state has a organization, a Native-led organization, nonprofit that does this work. And I think it's so important to support the network, because we all face the same issues, and we all struggle with how to deal with all of these multitude of barriers that we have. So just trying to embed it in everything we do is important.
Absolutely. Well, and I think in talking to the interconnected issues as being one of the challenges, I think that is something we have heard on this stage in particular with our MESs, presented to philanthropy time and time again, is that the ability to focus on a single issue or to remain hyper-focused is such a luxury. Mm-hmm. However, I think that there is something so potent and impactful when you can attack or address systematic issues that really transcend single issues in an Indigenous way. So kudos to you for doing that. And I would also be remiss if I didn't also right here push the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. Their Democracy is Indigenous program. I think both of you have features in this. This is their 5-year report. So seeing the work that you've done, that others across the country have done, if you are at a trade show or if you see this flying down the street, wherever you are, grab it, read it. It's encouraging stories of efforts and initiatives and organizations to be aware of. But in particular, really wanted to highlight, I think, Rock the Native Vote and Sacred Pipe Resource Center as just, I think, people that have really carried and are exemplars in this space. So we're, like I said, so glad to have you here and so glad to hear what your two organizations are doing. Matthew, I want to come over to your way now and take a little bit of a dive into the work that NARF has done in asking, are there specific legal protections that have been particularly impactful for Indigenous civil rights? A small question, I know.
Yeah, small questions deserve a small answer, right? No, I think first and foremost, when you think about the history, you think about treaties, of course, were entered into by many of our ancestors to protect our most important rights or our most important places. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say treaties were immensely important, whether you think about McGirt, the right to hunt and fish in Herrera, or, whatever it may be. And those are enforceable. Those are the law of the land, right? And many protections that derive from those. And we do work here at NARF, right, to lift up our treaties, to protect the right to hunt and fish, to protect our sacred places. And those are some of the first and most instrumental documents out there. In terms of the right to vote, it's the Voting Rights Act is front and center, right? We've utilized that more and more over the years. And what we've seen is that when Indian country brings lawsuits under the Voting Rights Act, it's like a 95% success rate. And it's because of, what we see with all of the things we've been talking about, the structural barriers that are in place, combined with these oppressive legal barriers, just fit exactly to what is illegal under the Voting Rights Act, right? So when you think about the voter ID law in North Dakota that required an address to vote that was struck down, or recently in Arizona, the requirement of an address to register to vote that was recently struck down, all tied to the Voting Rights Act. And so it certainly is front and center in terms of protecting the right to vote. And I think one story too that really comes to my mind is the work that was done in North Dakota on redistricting, which doesn't get a lot of interest because it is a complicated process, right? But it really sets the boundaries for where our people are elected from. And in North Dakota, without the Voting Rights Act, we wouldn't have been able to say that the MHA Nation now has a district that encompasses the reservation, and that they have elected a Native woman, the first Native woman ever, from the MHA Nation to the State House of Representatives in North Dakota. or that the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and the Spirit Lake Nation in North Dakota were successful in litigating under the Voting Rights Act to get a combined district so they can now elect 3 representatives to the state legislature in North Dakota. So I certainly think treaties are important, but also the Voting Rights Act is immensely important for protecting the right to vote, as well as the Civil Rights Act of protecting, our other civil rights as well. So those are a couple that come to my mind for sure.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those. Thank you. I wanted, while we're, I think, in this mind of organizational operations, I want to highlight a question from Morgan Blackburn, a fellow Potawatomi, from a fundraising perspective. And so what have been some of the biggest challenges with getting donors to understand the importance of your work? And then what have been some happy surprises? So I'm not sure if that's something that you all are doing or addressing on the fundraising side, but I think we all know it's a team effort when it comes to getting the dollars in the door. So I want to just leave that on the table for all of you and would love to hear your different perspectives.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. I'm sure that Ginny and Dr. Karry have some words on this as well. But, from a national perspective, I think you can see that a lot of the democracy funding doesn't necessarily flow to our grassroots organizations in Indian country, right? The dollars go to the states that have closer races, that are swing states. And so there are a lot of states in Indian country that are just left out. And I think it's a real travesty because we've seen in South Dakota, in North Dakota, in Montana and Alaska, and many places where the funds don't necessarily flow, there's a lot of amazing, important grassroots work that is being done to protect the right to vote, to protect, our health, our missing and murdered Indigenous people, like Dr. Karry said, addressing all of the issues that we have to address. And a lot of the funding may not flow to those places. And part of what we've done at NARF is create the Native American Voting Rights Coalition to try and bring folks together and tie them to different funders so that they can understand what's going on across the country and what work may be happening that some of these folks may be missing that's really important to lift up. So, I think just from that fundraising perspective, there is a lot of challenges. We know the history of philanthropy in Indian country has also been abysmal and it's getting a little bit better now, but it still has a lot of work to do. And we see that certainly in the democracy space as well.
Ginny and Dr. Karry, I'll throw it to you. I know that each of you have something to say on this one. So whoever would like to go first, I'll leave it for you.
I would just say that I would hope that donors in the world of philanthropy would understand the potential that we have here in Oklahoma. Census data tells us that we have the second largest voting age Native American population in the country. And only less than 50% of our Native American folks are voting. So the potential to get people organized and to get people registered and to get people voting is really, really high. And Oklahoma is a state where we have elected officials who actively target tribal sovereignty as one of the issues. And so we have a lot of challenges here, but we also have a lot of potential. And so I think those are the things that I would tell donors, or that I like to talk to donors about, because we have opportunity for great change with the right support.
Absolutely. Dr. Karry, to end us out on this one, from a funding perspective, biggest challenges or what have been some happy surprises?
So I think, speaking to donors and grant availability, it's always a challenge because there tends to be this idea that funding, people think, oh, there's an election coming up. Oh yeah, we probably better give some funding to them, to do voter efforts. But they don't realize, like in Indian country, that it's never ending. It's a never ending work that we do. So Matthew mentioned the redistricting. Like that is a huge issue. The census, participation in the census and the ACS, like those are ongoing structural, systemic issues that we work on. So we don't just work when it comes time to vote, when there's an election. We're constantly working with issues like redistricting and census and local offices and local issues, meeting with city officials, county officials, all of that work. So I think that funders aren't really aware that this is a full-time job, with overtime. This is something that we're constantly doing. It's not just during an election season, because what we see is, election season comes and suddenly someone says, "Oh, I have some money here for you," and they'll throw it at us, which is great, but we can do more long-term planning and more systemic structural change if we have a consistent stream of funding that is, also significant, where we can do ongoing planning for change. I think that's a big piece of the funding issue that I would like donors to understand. We, Sacred Pipe Resource Center, were fortunate enough to get of a 5-year funding from a foundation that was transformational, like that allowed us to do so much good work because we knew it was there. It was specifically targeted to do this ongoing, constant work, and it was a game changer. And I wish more foundations and donors would operate that way and understand that how we operate that way as well.
Absolutely. I know you're hitting right in kind of the sweet spot of where NAP is, because Matthew, you did mention, I think, bringing in that idea of the democratic world and the philanthropic world and the abysmal not set-asides, but the abysmal, I think, prioritization of Indigenous communities, or even the pursuit of an Indigenous perspective in those things. And that idea of those relationships and that idea of it being something that does transcend when campaigns spin up and disintegrate. It is something that is ongoing, that relationships take time, and that truly when you have those relationships, you're able to go into communities and do, I think, more impactful work than just showing up and rolling out of town without making really any impact. So thank you for going into that. I know Morgan is a fundraiser, if I'm not mistaken, from my own memory. So I know that hopefully was helpful to her and all of her that she's doing, but I appreciate that. So perfect. Glad to hear, Morgan. So now a part of our conversations, we always try and I think have a couple of questions that are geared towards the next generation. We NAP we prioritize this idea of an intergenerational conversation. And so I'd like to now branch into that, if you don't mind, just for a few minutes, to ask each of you of how can we encourage more Indigenous youth to become involved in advocacy and leadership roles? And Matthew, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of what we heard about is trying to convey, why this is important, either from a national level, which seems amorphous at times, or from a local level. And one thing that comes to my mind is just thinking about the importance that maybe a school board has to our youth, right? And we've taken up a lot of cases over the years where we've seen schools that don't allow us to celebrate our students in the way that we want to, right? Allowing them to wear their regalia at graduation, to have an eagle feather on their graduation cap, to bead their cap and walk across the stage proud, knowing that this is something that's been gifted to them in recognition of this major milestone of, graduating high school and moving on into the next step of life and maturing into an adult, right? And how the right to vote and participating in voting can affect that, right? Because our school boards oftentimes are elected. And so really conveying the importance of that to our youth and tying it to so many of the students we've worked with over the years that have stood up and said, this is not right, and laying those examples out there. I think is just one of the ways that it can be done, and one of the ways that we've done it over the years, just conveying that message of the importance of participating and how it can affect you on a personal level.
Absolutely. Dr. Karry, over to you for this one. That how can we encourage more Indigenous youth to become involved?
I think this next generation that's coming up and is really, they're well aware of issues. Like, they've been traumatized by a lot of issues that have come up over the years, and the state of affairs in our country today. And so they have an awareness that I think other generations, certainly not my generation, like I was clueless when but I see that they have such an awareness of the issues of the day. Our challenge, I think, as Native-led nonprofits and Indigenous leaders is, how do we channel that? How do we give them the proper channels to do that? And again, it goes back to helping them understand the structures that they're working in and the systems that they're working in. And here's how you can channel your efforts into making change. It's not just voting, it's also participating in census. It's also participating in your local elections. It's also campaigning for somebody and being on helping someone go door to door, or helping organizations go door to door. So we try to provide those opportunities, I think, just to create that awareness in a younger generation. So like right now we have a design contest going on for the younger kids to design a sticker or promotional items for Native voting, just to raise that awareness and to get them involved in a process early on, I think is important. So it may not be game changing, but that's gonna be a part of the fabric of who they are as they get older. So just providing those opportunities for them to get engaged in whatever way that we can, I think, is important.
Absolutely. Ginny, over to you.
Yeah.
How do we get young people involved?
Well, Dr. Karry has so many good ideas, and we actually are borrowing a lot of the things that Sacred Pike does, like the mock voting, for example. In October, the ballots aren't ready quite yet here in Oklahoma, but we'll do a mock vote and we'll allow people to vote. And what it will reveal is, if it was just an Indigenous vote, here's the results of that. So they have tons of great ideas out of Sacred Pipe, and through our cohort with the National Urban Indian Family Coalition, who connected us, we steal all the best ideas from them for the most part, but we're grateful for that partnership. But engaging with young people, the representation matters profoundly. And that now that we have elected officials like, or appointed officials like Secretary Holland and people that look like us at the highest levels of government, that's important. It's important for people to be able to see that in the election process. A few years ago, Rock the Native Vote, we did a focus group study with young people. I think they were all under the age of 24, but kind of getting input from them on how they use social media and the things that they look for. And a lot of times what they're looking for is convenient content. You know what I mean? Things that tell them what to do, steps to take, those types of things. The peer-to-peer influence is really important, and engaging influencers to be a part of your engagement process for particularly college-age students getting on their campuses. That's a big thing that Rock the Native Vote has done in the past, is we set up on college campuses and work with school officials when they do freshman orientation or things like that, that we try to have booths available to engage with them. They want to engage, but they want it to be, artistic. So they were like, make it artistic, make your visuals, make your things that are attracting us visually appealing, and in multimedia elements with video as well as graphic design. So they've challenged us to say, we want to participate, but here are the ways that you need to talk to us in order for us to want to engage. And so we've listened to them. We've had conversations with the age groups, and are trying to influence that through the things that we do in our year-long strategy. So again, the one-on-one's really important. We also do lots of events and things where we feed them. Nothing gets, your college kids to your event if you don't offer them a meal. So we try to do that as frequently as possible too. But I do think the representation matters. Being in dialogue and including them in the process matters, in our planning processes. Otherwise, it would be sorely outdated messages trying to reach that particular audience that they can see fake posts. They can tell if you're 50 years old and you're writing to try to reach them. I mean, they know better. They just know it all at that age. So, yeah. But having them engage in the process is really important, we found.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you've got to hit before corporate America takes it over and it becomes uncool.
Yeah.
Trying to go with the trends, right? Like, there's 1 or 2 accounts I follow that I'm like, okay, that's out if they're doing it now.
It can't be too polished, for sure.
Right. Okay, y'all. Well, I'm going to move into just our final question. So before we have kind of just our closing thoughts and comment time, but how does the preservation of Indigenous culture and traditions play a role in the fight for civil rights? And how can this be retained moving forward? So it's a hefty question. I understand. So I'm sorry. I'm going to have to do this to you, Dr. Karry. You're going first.
Well, I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about, and my ethnocentrism is showing here, but I think as Indigenous people, like, I always say, like, our traditional elders were master psychologists. They understood how people worked and how relationships worked and how families worked. And so that's why they used a humility-based process, because in order to lead, you have to have the attitude like, I can't lead. I don't know. I'm not qualified to lead. So I think there's a lot that Indigenous culture, Indigenous perspectives and worldview and Indigenous thought can teach the mainstream world about leadership and what servant leadership really looks like, about ethics. Ethics is a huge issue in politics now. And I think we have a lot to teach non-Native society about ethics, having good ethics and being a leader. I think about caring for our people and our relatives, animals, and our environment. All of those things are our relatives. How to be a good relative. So I think our Indigenous cultures really can be the base for, I see a lot of mainstream people really floundering right now because they don't like the two-party system and the polarization of the two-party system. And they're looking for something that brings people together and treats this world as a collective where we're all respected and, we all have, we respect each other's civil rights. So that what they're searching for, Indigenous communities have. That's what we have. And we've just never been allowed to be able to have the types of platforms to say we have the answers.
If I wasn't going to blow somebody's speakers out, I would be screaming and cheering for that. Absolutely. Ginny, I'll head over to you for this one. How does the preservation of Indigenous culture and traditions play a role?
That I would echo what Dr. Karry is already saying. They turn to us for climate change solutions. They turn to us for so many things that we have solutions for, and being in good relation with one another and the world is fundamental to many of our value systems. So I don't have much more to add to that than, we have so much to offer. And the way that our communities are starting to flex their sovereign muscles and they're starting to build food sovereignty programs and, the ways that we are implementing relationships. I'll just give a quick example. During COVID in Oklahoma, the vaccination process was really slow, and it was the tribal communities that stepped up and were able to provide those services for not only Native Americans or tribal members, but to anybody who needed it. And so that value of being in relation and caring for one another beyond our boundaries or beyond what's defined for us externally, I think that we have so much to teach, and not just through words, but by the actions. And if people would really look at how tribes our communities deal with each other and how we support each other and the things that we can provide to others, they'll see real partnerships there, and strong partners to bring solutions to some of these really, really big issues.
Absolutely. All right, Matthew, headed over to you next. What is the role of preserving Indigenous culture and traditions?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole reason that we do what we do, right? Is to preserve these things, to preserve a way of life for our people, to protect our cultures, to help them heal, lift them up, protect our families and our communities, right? So, and understanding that those views that we have, the relationships that we see to each other, to, you know, the trees and the animals and all of those things, and how they can be the solution, like Ginny and Dr. Karry have mentioned. So that, to me, that's the whole reason we do what we do, is to protect those things.
Absolutely. Well, we'll now move into, I think, just our final little wrap down part. And so we like to make sure that you all get the closing word. Our audience typically spans the entire sector and beyond, from funders and Native nonprofits to elected officials and budding future leaders. I'll give you 2 questions to choose from. If you need the guardrails, I know that's helpful for some. What is something that you would want to leave our group having a better understanding of, or what is something that philanthropy needs to do to support and extend Indigenous voting and civil rights? So, you know, again, really small questions, no pressure or anything. But Ginny, I'm starting off with you on this one.
Okay. Well, I again, thank you all for the time to come before you and share our thoughts on this important topic and voter registration. For Rock the Native Vote, always can use the financial support. We're doing quite a bit of things, but there's not one full-time staff person on Rock the Native Vote. We are all part-time contractors. We have day jobs, you know what I mean, those types of things. But we have a vision, and our vision is to move into our own 501c4 status. Our vision is to look at going national with Rock the Native Vote chapters nationwide. Our vision is to share the great content and knowingness and best practices that we've developed across Indian country. And so, the support financially, the support through leadership, all those things are important to us. We're at a really pivotal moment. And in the state of Oklahoma, like I said, the potential here is incredible. If we can get the investments to reach out and to activate the Native American voting age population to engage, we can be a major player in a state that has many challenges when it comes to our tribal communities. And so I would encourage all of our folks to register to vote, to get out and engage and vote, but then also to look at the electoral process in general and how we can engage in higher levels. And we're excited to look ahead at where we're going and the things that will be coming for Rock the Native Vote in the future.
Absolutely. Excited to see it, and absolutely sending you all the best in, I think, scaling and growing. So thank you for that. All right, Matthew, you're next.
Yeah, I think I'd probably leave something, for our people doing the important work that's out there, and just really making sure that we understand the importance of registering and voting, right? Because it affects so many things in our lives. And we know it's complicated, the history is complicated, but this is one tool that can help us in many ways, whether it's, protecting our women and children, whether it's making sure we see representatives that understand tribal sovereignty, tribal nationhood, and protecting our communities, or whether it's electing a board member that will fight for you to be able to wear your regalia at graduation. There are so many reasons that voting is important and that can be impactful. And it's one tool that we can use to lift up all these different things, acknowledging at the same time that it's complicated and it's not a perfect system. But we have seen, like was mentioned, Secretary Holland, the first Native woman nominated to a cabinet secretary position ever, on the back of the Native vote, I would say. So there is power there, and there is importance in terms of affecting our people and our ways of lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matthew. All right, Dr. Karry, bring us home if you don't mind.
I'll speak to the funding question because I think it is a critical piece. I mentioned earlier about the foundation that gave us this pivotal funding. And I think it's important to note that they did more than just provide funding, because this is just not about dollars. This is about supporting partnerships and collaborations. So the foundation that helped us before actually connected NARF and NCAI and the network of organizations to do the work. And it's really hard work. It's not, I mean, these are big challenges. We're running across some really big stoppers. And so not just providing funding, but providing partnerships and relationships type of funding. So in our one of the other hats that I wear is being a partner with the Good Relatives Collaborative. We're an intermediary providing grants, and we're trying to do it on a cooperative process. We know that competitive grants have really harmed Indian country. Competitive grants harm us. They create silos, they create resentment, they create hostilities, and we don't need more competitive funding. We need targeted relationships with funders who want to align themselves with the work that we do in ensuring civil rights, ensuring democracy and the right to vote, and ensuring protections, because our tribal communities, our Indigenous communities are still being attacked. We're the targets of environmental racism, of attacks on civil rights. Our sacred spaces are still in danger. So that it hasn't stopped, and the work still needs to be done. But I think from a funding perspective, reaching out to organizations and creating those partnerships is so much more advantageous than the competitive funding that pits us against each other. This has got to be collaborative work. This has got to be, we have to be in this together. And so, I hope that was the right note to end on.
That I was going to say, I could hear the Lulus and the Lelus across Indian country now, actually. So, no, that was, I think, a wonderful, wonderful way to bring such a powerful conversation to the close. I think that for our audience, we have centered that issue in the historical context. We have explored, I think, those lived experiences are what we're facing today, but then also looking to, I think, organizations and those grassroots movements that are providing a pathway forward that is not only encouraging, but is preserving aspects of our culture and our own traditions in such a way that we haven't had previously in democracy, and we haven't had since colonization. And so I just want to thank you all for giving that voice, for taking us on this journey. And funders, give them money. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, those unrestricted funds, those long-term grants, you've seen the expertise that exists within Indian country. And I think that this is one of the best ways in getting those dollars in the door, getting those dollars to where they can make an impact. This is why we do what we do. And you are seeing, I think, representatives from 3 organizations that are doing it well, and that are exemplary in how they're going about it. So thank you, Chimigwech, to all of you for your time, your expertise, and your work. We know it's not easy, Dr. Karry. I think you said that. Like, it is hard, challenging work that you all do have the heart for. And so I think sometimes the double-edged sword is the defeats then, or when you come across those challenges, it hits hard. It hits right in the soul of who you are and the soul of the work. So thank you for going to bat for our communities every day and for just being the amazing leaders that you all each are in the organizations that you are representing today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. I know we all appreciate, I think I'm speaking for everybody that said we really appreciate this opportunity to amplify some of the issues that we face every day. And it's, another hallmark of leaders of Native nonprofits is we don't always get these platforms. We're on the ground like the ducks paddling on the pond, And so this is really an amazing opportunity. So I thank you. I thank Native Americans in Philanthropy. I thank everybody who tuned in for this and helped amplify this, because, that's how we get the word out about the things that we don't always get to say. So again, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ginny, I know you've got an event tonight. I know that the Dr. Karry and Matthew have to be busy. I'm going to hit just our final closing announcements, but I will not make you stay on the screen and smile while I do that. So please do feel free to turn your cameras off or do whatever you need to do. But we are just so grateful, I think, for them, and are so honored, I think, that NAP as an organization has centered and prioritized this. So thank you to NAP leadership. Thank you to our funders. Thank you to our members for making necessary conversations like this possible. It is exciting, and it is, I feel like exciting is the best way to say it. The plans for the future and where we can go, it is truly just humbling to be a part of it and to witness it up close and personal like this. So as a reminder, this session was open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous and non-Indigenous allies. If you're not a NAP member and you want to learn more, please visit our website, nativephilanthropy.org, or email Reina Davia Day at rday@nativephilanthropy.org. You should be receiving an email soon with a link to a short survey. Please take a few moments to share your opinions about what you liked in this session, in this series, and we use the information as data points moving forward to know what we can plan for as well. It should only take about 5 to 6 minutes, but it does provide invaluable feedback, not only for us in reviewing, but in the planning. 2025 is staring us in the face. So please know that we will be using all of that to make sure that we keep these member education sessions exactly what you need them to be, or what would be helpful in your operations moving forward. So please take a chance to fill that out. Lastly, we want to end our time together with a reminder to register to vote. Your voice is vitally important to national, state, and especially in local elections. As Indigenous people, we have not always had the opportunity to participate in this way. I hope you'll take advantage of these hard-fought rights and join me and others in being the best ancestor possible by casting a ballot. With only 49 days left, our team at NAP continues the countdown to Election Day. We're sustaining our focus on civic engagement next month with our friends and accomplices in the field of changing philanthropy, Hispanics in philanthropy. Through the lens of indigeneity, we'll be exploring advocacy and activism as it relates and is seen in both communities to celebrate the final day of National Hispanic Heritage Month, October 15th. So please do join us that day, register. We would love to see you back in these spaces. We will, of course, welcome those questions back, and we're going to have a pretty good panel for that one as well. I feel like I say that at all of them, but this one will also be really good. So we just know what we're doing here at NAP, I think. So we hope to see you and new friends there, and thank you for having and joining us in your space, and have a terrific Tuesday and wonderful week. And lastly, don't forget to vote. If anything, please don't forget to vote. So thank you all so very much. And Bama P later on.